Bueno, como ya ustedes lo han visto, emitimos un comunicado a las 06:00 horas para mantener informado al pueblo de Venezuela. Nadie ha dicho pausa aquí.
November 2025. The world remains unsettled. Conflicts continue to evolve, and power politics has returned to the center of global affairs. Across Europe, the war in Ukraine has entered a prolonged phase. In the Middle East, tensions rise between Iran, Israel, and regional blocs. In the Indo-Pacific, military buildups continue quietly but steadily. And now, the focus unexpectedly shifts to Latin America. For years, this region was considered stable. But beneath that surface, the old rivalries never disappeared. And in Venezuela, one of the most sanctioned countries in the world, a familiar confrontation is taking shape again. After months of pressure and repeated American naval patrols in the Caribbean, Caracas has decided to act. 200,000 troops mobilized, a nationwide alert declared. And for the first time in years, Venezuela's military posture looks more defensive and more unified than ever before. The government statement is short but sharp. Our sovereignty is not a subject for negotiation. This isn't an offensive campaign. It's a signal that Venezuela will not allow foreign presence to dictate its internal or regional affairs. The U.S. Navy's latest operation in the Caribbean was officially labeled as anti-narcotics enforcement. But the scale and coordination suggest a much broader purpose. Satellite imagery shows increased deployment of surveillance aircraft and guided missile destroyers, accompanied by the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford. This kind of presence isn't common outside of large-scale deterrence operations. For Washington, it's routine, a projection of stability and control in what it considers its traditional sphere. For Caracas, however, it's an unmistakable act of intimidation. The Venezuelan Ministry of Defense called it a clear violation of regional balance. The mobilization that followed was not spontaneous. It was organized, measured, and nationwide. Across multiple provinces, Army units were moved to defensive lines, air bases were reactivated, and naval forces in La Guaira and Puerto Cabello began readiness patrols. Analysts note that the Venezuelan response is unusual, not an emotional reaction, but a calculated attempt to demonstrate that the country remains capable of organized defense despite years of sanctions and shortages. The world's reaction has been mixed and careful. In Washington, the operation was described as a necessary security measure. In Caracas, it was called provocation under the flag of law. Most Latin American governments, though cautious not to challenge the United States directly, expressed unease with the escalation. Colombia's suspension of intelligence sharing was an unexpected move. For years, Bogotá was one of Washington's closest partners. Its decision reflects a growing discomfort with the militarization of regional diplomacy. In Brazil and Argentina, leaders called for restraint and a return to dialogue. Mexico's government remained neutral, but criticized the use of naval pressure as a diplomatic tool. In Moscow, the response was immediate. The Kremlin condemned the U.S. operation, calling it a revival of 20th century power politics. At the United Nations, the European Union and several neutral countries urged both sides to reduce tensions. For observers in Europe, the crisis serves as another example of how global competition between the U.S. and Russia is expanding into new theaters, not through war, but through influence and posture. The Russia-Venezuela relationship isn't new or improvised. It's a continuation of 2 decades of steady cooperation. Since the early 2000s, Russia has supported Venezuela with energy partnerships, oil infrastructure, and defense contracts that now exceed several $billion. Sukhoi Su-30 fighters, S-300 air defense systems, T-72B1 tanks, and artillery systems form the backbone of Venezuela's deterrent structure. In recent years, Moscow has also provided training programs and cyber defense assistance, mostly quiet, small-scale, but consistent. As the current tension builds, reports suggest that Caracas has requested modern radar and early warning systems to counter surveillance activity in its airspace. Russia hasn't publicly confirmed such transfers, but has expressed political support, calling Venezuela a partner in preserving regional sovereignty. This doesn't mean Moscow will deploy troops or ships, but symbolically, Russia's voice in support of Caracas adds diplomatic weight and raises the cost for Washington of any direct intervention. Venezuela's military doctrine has evolved from conventional defense to what it calls asymmetric and popular resistance. This model emphasizes flexibility and survival rather than large-scale combat. In practical terms, it means local militias, territorial defense units, and rapid response teams trained for sabotage and ambush tactics. More than 5,000 man-portable air defense missiles are believed to be distributed across the country's terrain, from coastal defense points to jungle bases along the Colombian border. The doctrine aims to make any invasion long, costly, and politically untenable. Venezuela knows it cannot win against the U.S. militarily, but it can make military victory meaningless. This strategy is rooted in lessons from modern hybrid warfare, a mix of mobility, information control, and national endurance. It's not about aggression, it's about outlasting pressure. For Russia, Venezuela represents something larger than a regional partnership. It's part of a broader geopolitical equation, one that places Russian presence and influence within reach of the U.S. mainland. Moscow doesn't need to deploy warships or missiles to create an effect. Simply maintaining cooperation in intelligence, logistics, and defense technology is enough to alter Washington's calculations. In the same way NATO expansion reshaped Russia's borders, Moscow's quiet engagement in Latin America redefines the boundaries of American comfort. This isn't a return to the Cold War. It's a modern version, a contest of access, visibility, and diplomatic signaling. For now, Russia appears content to use diplomacy and defense exports as tools of balance, not confrontation. But the symbolism is powerful. It tells the world that power can be projected through partnership, not occupation. The stakes for Venezuela remain high. Economically, sanctions continue to restrict its access to global markets. Inflation, though partially contained, still challenges the country's stability. But paradoxically, the confrontation has revived a sense of national unity that had faded in recent years. State media highlight sovereignty and self-reliance. Opposition figures, while critical of government policy, largely agree on rejecting external interference. This domestic consensus gives the government a stronger political base and allows Caracas to frame the crisis as a defense of dignity rather than ideology. For the United States, the challenge is managing perception. A prolonged standoff could appear heavy-handed, especially as Latin American countries increasingly prefer neutrality. Analysts in Europe see parallels with other regions where Washington's presence no longer guarantees consensus. The Caribbean tension has not escalated into open conflict, but the potential remains. What happens next depends on dialogue, on whether diplomacy can move faster than strategic miscalculation. This crisis also reveals a deeper truth. The unipolar world is over. The dominance of a single power is giving way to multiple centers of influence, each pursuing its own security and narrative. In this emerging multipolar world, even smaller nations like Venezuela can influence global strategy, not through strength, but through position and persistence. For Russia, this is an opportunity to maintain relevance far from its borders. For the U.S., it's a reminder that geographic distance no longer guarantees control. For the world, it's another test of whether power and dialogue can coexist in the same space. Thank you for watching. If you value factual, balanced analysis of international affairs, subscribe and stay tuned. Our goal is to provide context, not confrontation, to explain the choices shaping today's world without bias or exaggeration.